Good morning or good afternoon, depending on what class you are. So now we're moving on to form, and form is really the culmination of everything we've learned so far. Meaning to say that if you haven't done the lessons, the prerequisites, or the lessons that we did before this, you're going to start having a hard time as we move forward. So if you haven't done those lessons, do all of those lessons before you do this, because everything combines. We're using line, we're using shapes, we're using values to create form, which is a three-dimensional illusion created on a 2D surface. So we're going to create a cone, we're going to create a cube, and we're going to create a sphere. And you really have to use all of those things that we learned, like I just said, to really complete this lesson successfully. And it's the first time, so just try your best and you should be okay. So right now in the video lecture, I'm going to show you how to prepare your paper. And then in the video demonstration, you can see me actually carry out the lesson. I'll also provide the handout for those of you that have a printer at home. But if you don't have a printer at home, you can still follow along without comparing the value. I'll do the comparison of the value for you, and you just do exactly like I do in the video demonstration. Now, I'm not going to play the whole video demonstration because it's a long one. So this class will probably be a combination, a work day for those of you who haven't finished the previous lessons. And those of you who have, you can start working on this now. So it'll be ready for next class or when I actually have to grade it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the handout that I prepared on form, and then I'm going to send it back to myself in class, and then I will play the video demonstration. Right after the handout, right after I read the handout, I'm going to show you how to prepare your worksheet in case you can't print it out and you can't follow along with me in the video demonstration. Now, in the video demonstration, I talk about a measuring technique called the sight size measuring technique, or relational proportion, or the rule of halves measuring technique. For those of you who do have a printer at home, just follow along with me on this video on how to create the handout, and just use the video demonstration just for the value part or the shading part of it. And I think you should be fine. I don't know when we're going to get to those measuring techniques, because one of them does require us to be in person. I do want to teach you a few, but I don't want to confuse you, but we will eventually have to get to the measuring techniques. I don't know if it's going to be soon or if it's going to take a little bit longer. So we'll see what happens. So right now I'm going to read the handout for you, and then I'll come back and show you how to prepare your worksheet.
Form. An element of art that is three-dimensional and encloses volume, includes height, width, and depth. As in a cube, a sphere, a pyramid, or a cylinder. Form may also be free-flowing. How is form used in art? When drawing form, it is used to give the illusion of a third dimension to a two-dimensional drawing. Using form correctly is necessary to give objects a realistic look. There you can see a square turns into a cube, a triangle into a pyramid. When an object is rounded, you need to add the additional element of value to successfully create the illusion of form. There you have the example of a cylinder and a cone and a sphere. It is also possible to add value to a non-rounded object. Here you see, again, the square being turned into a cube.
Here we are with the original drawing. And the next thing we're going to create the cone, but I want you to see how big I'm drawing. Okay, so this is taking up a big portion of the paper. Don't do tiny little drawings, okay? I want you to be able to draw big so we can do bigger drawings moving forward. So the next thing that we're going to do is a cone. And like all of these drawings, you want to make sure that you're drawing very lightly. As a matter of fact, I think that maybe my lines here are too dark. So I'm just going to get my eraser and I'm going to very lightly go over it just so I could barely see it. But you want to make sure that you're defining things using value and not defining things using lines, because in the three-dimensional world, which is the world that we live in, things are defined by value and nothing truly has a dark outline around it. So make sure that your lines are not super dark. And your drawing is going to be better for it, trust me. Those of you that listen to that bit of advice, you're going to see that your work is going to look more three-dimensional. If your lines are super dark and outlined, then your work is not going to look three-dimensional and it's going to look flat. So let's move on to the cone. This is a wide cone, so it's kind of like not too narrow. And in the actual reference, I usually test kids by seeing how well they're observing, because this line on the right side, it doesn't even really connect completely. And too often kids don't pay attention to that level of detail. So that's kind of like a little trick that I throw in there. And you don't need it to connect because your eye kind of takes care of the rest. See, so if I kind of split that up, it doesn't make too much of a difference. And you can still see that it's a cone. Too often students feel like every little line needs to be placed in. And that's just simply not true in every situation. Maybe in some situations it is, but not in this one. So now we want to draw what's going to be the shadow of this cone. And again, you're not going directly from the corner, but a little bit above it. And that's going to come out. And this shadow, because it is a cone, it's a little bit more pointy here at this end. And then this curves back this way. And it's going to kind of be like this. And that is your cone. Now for the shape that students seem to struggle the most with is the sphere. And I guess rightly so, because this takes a little bit of practice. And let me try to zoom in for this next bit just so you can see it more clearly. So for the sphere, what I tell students to do is kind of set yourself up first so you know what your top is going to be and what your bottom is going to be. And then go ahead and put in the space for your sides. And that kind of limits you to this area. And now what I tell the students is, okay, start connecting your top and your bottom. Remember how I discussed drawing in pieces like that. So you don't want to do one big solid line holding the pencil down. That's not really the best way to do it. And then you want to connect to the bottom. And I mean, don't get me wrong, the sphere is not going to be perfect. But it's the way that I would do it if I was trying to draw a sphere. See, I went a little bit beyond because I feel like if I had limited myself to that line that I created, it wouldn't be as circular. And then kind of take a good look at it, but don't overanalyze it too much, right? You don't want to draw it and redraw it and draw it and redraw it. And now, since you drew it in pieces very lightly anyways, and we're going to define this using value, not line, then you could erase it, kind of bring it in a little bit more there, or however you feel you have to bring it in. The shadow for the sphere, it kind of starts curving up. Remember our follow the line assignment, and you see this goes a little bit up. It's not really sideways. Let me make sure that my paper is straight so you could see that it is curved up. So if I straighten out my paper for the camera, now you can see it a bit more clearly that it is curving up. And then this goes down. And you definitely want to make sure that this area here is not heavily outlined, because that shadow, especially in the demonstration, you're going to see that it dissipates quite a bit. And then down here you have the bottom of your shadow. And then that, guys, is how you prepare your worksheet. Okay? That's your worksheet. And now you can start shading. And for that, I'm going to send you over to the video demonstration. And again, in that video demonstration, there is, I talk about the site size measuring technique because I create this using a reference. But since you don't have a reference, I just showed you how to create it right now. And I might just skip the creation part of it and just go straight to the drawing part of it, or the shading part of it, let's say. So now what you want to do is, using your value, your different values, you want to start shading this appropriately. And that's exactly what I do in the demonstration video. So you need to go over and watch that video. And I'm just showing you that this is the next step. I'm not actually gonna do this whole assignment and this lecture video, okay? So you would shade this. I'm gonna ask you guys what the darkest side of this is. The top is the lightest. This is the second lightest, and then this is the darkest of the sides. And then of course the shadow is darker than all of that. And that's how you start to create your 3 dimensions. I'm almost tempted to just do it here, but I think that the other demonstration is a much more thorough demonstration than I would do here. But by hatching and cross-hatching and differentiating your values, you can definitely start to create the illusion of 3 dimensions. Maybe I will, I don't know, I'm getting the bug to just do this. Maybe I'll just do the cube here for you guys. If you want a more thorough demonstration with more accuracy and more explanation about matching values, then watch the video demonstration of it, which will also be posted. I probably shouldn't do this just off the top of my head because it's not the most accurate, but see, I'm going to darken that line, and there's a bit less explanation here of actually what I'm doing. I think in the video I explain a little bit more. Right here underneath the cube is a bit darker because that shadow is kind of the strongest one because it's directly underneath. And you want to remember that your value for your shadow is going to be the darkest when it comes to the cube. But also it shouldn't be super duper dark because that's just not what's happening with the cube. Some of the values get super duper dark when it comes to the cone and when it comes to the sphere. And even within the shadows, the value isn't always the same. And I am going to use, which I don't think I did in the other demonstration, but you guys can use it if you like. I am going to use a tissue just to kind of even out the value right here. And this is also a very dark value, but you can already see it start to become more 3-dimensional. And definitely what you want to do is make sure that your tissue is clean, or at least the area of the tissue that you use is clean, so you don't make it too dark. Kind of follow the example that I gave you during the value discussion. You just want to keep your values under control. But definitely I want to make that side much darker. And then the top needs a value, because right now it's more of a value of 0. And that's not really what I want. So for the top, I want a very light value, and this is kind of the value that I want here. So I want to make sure that the bottom is the darkest. So before I even darken this, I'm going to add more pressure here. And you can see it start to darken. And now I'm going to darken this. Remember to hold the pencil from the back so you have a wider range of motion. And remember that you're going to hatch and cross hatch. So you see, since I'm holding the pencil from the back, I can easily cover that whole area. And if you go a little bit into that top one, which I'm doing now, don't worry too much about it, because you can go back and kind of control it with your eraser. It's all about value. I mean, the lines and getting them in place, it takes some practice for the cube, but truly what makes it three-dimensional is the value and the application of value. And all it does is really, it just takes some time, but it's not difficult. It's really not. Let me just zoom out a little bit. Now I'm going to cross hatch. Now I'm gonna do a combo by going up and down. That's to make sure that my lines aren't too obviously going in one direction. I want to make sure that the value is even throughout. And you don't really like I said, I probably shouldn't have done this. There's a more thorough explanation in the other demonstration if you want just more information about what actually is happening. I really do think that should probably be darker, but I'm going to leave it at that, and I'm going to just clean up a little bit. You want to make sure that you have a crisp line there, even though we're going to add a value right here, because that's the way that a cube would look. Cube, when it comes to the cube, the values aren't really blending too much. Like, I mean, you clearly have a value over here, a value over there, you know, like, a value here, a value here, for example. Now I'm gonna do a lighter value on this side than this. And I do think that this should be darker, but I'm not gonna push it. Plus, I don't want these demonstrations to run too long. And it's already, because the other demonstration is quite long, like the actual demonstration. And when you have a lighter value like this going over a darker value, in this particular case, you could just go right into it and it's not gonna matter very much. So you don't have to worry about stopping right there on the edge, just shade right across. When it's a darker value going into a lighter value, that's different. And again, you want to make sure that the line up there isn't what's defining your work, and the line over here. So you can see that there's clearly a value here, so you know where this cube ends, because the value tells you that. You don't need a super obvious line there telling you where it ends. This here should definitely be darker. So now I'm just going to apply quite a bit of pressure right there. And you can see that that gives it a lot of what we call depth. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. And you see that also gives it a lot of depth. So if you thought that was dark before, you could see how it could still be even darker. I am going to try to even this out. Hopefully I don't screw it up. I'm gonna very lightly try to even out this value. I'm gonna go a little bit into the top there, and then I'm gonna, and a little bit past the edge here, because I'm gonna clean it up with my eraser, and it's gonna give a nice effect. Watch. So if I just clean this up, then you see it gives like a nice crisp line, and that's a great effect when you're trying to draw a cube like this. And then over here we're also going to just clean it up a little bit. So it's nice and crisp, which it should be for the cube. And now the very last value is the top value, which it doesn't look too bad if you leave a value of 0, which it is right now. But I don't want to do that. So I'm gonna be a little risky here, and I'm just gonna do a super duper like light value. Very lightly. And then I'm gonna use just a clean tissue to kind of spread that value around and even out my lines. Just a little clean piece of tissue. Going past the edges, which I'll then go back and kind of clean up. And yeah, just clean up a little bit. I'm going to try to erase any remaining lines. So then this cube is defined only by 4 values. And that's not bad for the cube, I wouldn't say. Like I said, it's probably a more thorough demonstration in the other video, but that's not too bad at all. So I'm gonna send it back to myself, and then I'm gonna just skip straight to the shading part of the other videos, which I recommend that you do as well, or the other video. There's only one other demonstration video. But this is a really fun one if you can get it right. Like I said, a lot of you haven't completed the previous assignments, so I really don't want to hear that I don't know how to draw speech, because if you've been doing everything I've been asking you to do, this is just the next step. So I'm going to send it back to myself, and you'll be hearing from me in a second. So I was briefly watching that other demonstration, and it's great. It's a great demonstration, but because I talk so much about the size method, and I'm using a reference literally while I am demonstrating, it won't be completely helpful to everyone, or I don't think it'll be the most helpful thing to do. So I have made the decision to continue to show you how to do this without having a reference directly in front of you. So I already showed you how to draw the shapes that you're going to need. Now we're just going to keep on shading. Now for the cone, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you start off with a very dark value, even darker than anything that you did with the cube. And that dark value is going to come kind of all the way down at a slant over here. So I'm just kind of putting in the area where that dark value is going to be, and it's going to come down here, and I'm going to make all of this substantially darker right here. And then right here along the edge, you kind of want to make a line. You don't want to come all the way down. Now I'm going to work really hard to try to get this pretty dark. Again, hatching and cross hatching and applying pressure. And you got to make sure you keep your pencil sharp. There may be some glare, and you'll see that usually in class we work on something called easels, and I mentioned that in the other video, which I don't think I'm going to show now. But the more pressure you apply, the more graphite gets on there, and then you start to get this glare. And that's okay. I mean, just if you really want to know what the accurate value is, then you need to start to hold your paper up, and then you have a better idea of what your value is really like. Now for the cone, you have some pretty extreme values, and you have to blend them. And that's like these two values. So it starts to lighten up significantly. And you want to make sure you see how there's a clear distinction or a separation here. You want to hatch and cross hatch between these two values, easing up the pressure as you do, and then you can kind of see how those values are going to start to blend into each other. And again, that was why it was so important to do the value scale where you blend, because this object is supposed to be round. Before I continue, I want to make sure that the bottom here is very, very dark as well. So just right there, applying lots of pressure. This is going to be super dark here. Much darker than anything on the cone, on the cube. Give me 1 second, because I need to sharpen my pencil. The tip has kind of worn down, and it's not letting me apply as much pressure as I need to apply to make this as dark as it needs to be. So I'm going to sharpen my pencil. I'll be right back. Some of you might be curious why my pencil looks different than yours. And it's because I sharpen it with a blade, and I know some of your parents probably do this too. And the reason I do this is because it lasts longer. It's a bit more delicate. Like the tip ends up being a bit more delicate. But that way I don't have to constantly sharpen it all the time. I don't teach this because I don't require that you buy a blade, and at the same time I don't want you to hurt yourself with a blade. And you can, trust me, I've cut myself doing this more than once. So and also it's not really necessary. I do it to just save some time, because you truly do need to have your pencil sharp like all the time. And since I draw a lot, you'll typically see that my pencils are sharpened this way, which is the same way that my professor at university sharpens his pencils. And the reason I'm showing you is because I was curious. I saw that his pencils were different, and I asked him, and then he taught the technique to the class, how to do this. And it takes quite a bit of practice to do it right, and even then I don't always do it right. So if you are going to try something like this, first of all, I don't recommend it. Second of all, never cut towards yourself. Third of all, do it under the supervision of your parents or something. Last thing I want you to do is to cut yourself. And I have cut myself, guys, like pretty bad. I have a scar still. I think this is one of them. That one right there. Just getting careless. But this is more to answer your curiosity, because I know somebody's curious, like I was curious, as to why do your pencils look that way, mister? And this is why. And this is probably gonna break on me right now, but and it also makes a mess. Like, look at all this. So when I do it, I want to make sure that I do it over a garbage can. And I just grab the paper and toss it like that. But now I should be able to apply more pressure. Plus, it also takes control at this level to apply the right type of pressure so as not to break the tip, which you've already seen me do a few times in these demonstrations. And that way you can darken it without it getting too glossy, too shiny, because of the way that that you might be treating the paper. And what I did that for was because I really wanted to darken right in here. I don't know if that's coming across in the video, but it's true, and like I could see that it's darker now that my pencil is sharper. So yeah, this whole shadow is like super dark, and you want to make it as dark as you can. Very dark, very, very dark. Hatching and cross hatching. There is a light area, or you should have a light area even in the shadows. So what you have to remember is even your shadows have different values. You don't want to make it all the same because it doesn't look natural. So even when you're doing your shadows, if you look at shadows carefully, don't get me wrong, I mean, they're dark, but there are areas that are darker than others. So one area that I'm going to leave lighter is kind of the center here. And you'll see that when I'm closer to being done, but right now I'm not that close to being done. All of this needs to get filled, and I want to make sure I don't I am doing a little zigzagging, and I shouldn't be, but you know, It's not a complete deal breaker. You just don't want to get into that habit. For the darker areas, it's more acceptable than the other areas. So again, applying a fair amount of pressure to make sure that this area is nice and dark. This is the little area that I want to keep a bit lighter. But I want it to blend. I don't want it to be so obvious. So right here, I'm going to hatch and cross hatch along the separation to kind of blend these two values. And you can see that blended quite nicely. And that's pretty dark. I think I'm pretty happy with that so far. I want it to be a little bit darker here. And you can see this is much darker than this, right, for the cube. And that's kind of what you want. And there's all these rules when you're comparing it to something else and all this stuff. Like how dark do you really want it to be? If you had a reference in front of you, you could compare, but this is why I've decided not to show that other video. Because it's hard to understand, especially with all the measuring techniques and things I'm discussing. And we are distance learning, so you're just learning a little bit different than the other students. If you're really curious and you want to be an artist professionally, I do think you should go over and look at those other videos. They're a bit like, I think it's educational in the sense that it's not meant to entertain. So I feel like you'll definitely get a lot of information out of it. But that you won't, it's not a Michael Bay movie, so there aren't going to be a lot of explosions. But if you're thinking about doing this professionally and learning about shading and stuff, it's definitely very important to know how to compare value. This whole side of the cone should be a little bit lighter. And I'm still using the handout that I would have given you, but I'm not going step by step with it, and I'm not comparing the value like I do in the other demonstration video, because you don't have that handout right in front of you. Some of you may be able to print it, but I know that probably most of you won't. So I'm doing this for you, doing it all over again. Right here, this is lighter, or should be lighter, but you don't want to make it super obvious. Same thing here. And remember what I said about shading, kind of a light area next to a darker area. You can just shade it and kind of go right into that darker area, and it's not going to affect it much. Like, you don't want to try to hold yourself and like not go to the edge here. And then if you did that, that would create what we call kind of like a halo effect, where just the very edge ends up being a weird value that doesn't really match up. I'm almost done with the cone here. There, I'm not zigzagging there. I am actually lifting the pencil. And I am gonna leave this area a little bit lighter. Kind of got like a little glow going on. But maybe right now I feel like that glow is a little too strong. So let me just darken it, that whole area just a little bit. And this right here, I want to make it as dark as the top. So I'm going to hatch. And again, I am lifting my pencil. I'm not zigzagging there. And cross hatch. And I want to make sure I have a nice point. It's going to help it look more three-dimensional. I'm going to put a little bit of emphasis here on this line in certain areas. But I'm not gonna shade too much here. Maybe just a little bit. This is one of those times where you want to be directional. Like you want to go in this direction because this is a curved surface. So it helps to be a little bit directional. Sometimes you'll see people shade with their fingers. So like I could spread this value around with my finger. And if you don't mind getting dirty, that's not a big deal. Like you can do that if you wish, but you got to be careful not to have oil on your hands. And as people, we kind of naturally have oil in our hands. So I personally don't like to do that with my finger. If I am going to use a shading tool, which isn't completely necessary, there's also people who will not use any of that type of shading tool. Then I prefer to use like a tissue or a tortillon. I am gonna, that like shadow right there was a little rough because it was such a dramatic contrast. So I'm just gonna do a little hatching and cross hatching to soften it. And that's a term you might hear me say later as well, just to soften that up a little bit and just make it look a little, kind of a little bit more round. And that's it for the cone, you guys. See, this is bugging me a bit because this should be curved like this, and maybe it's a little bit too wide. Like, so I'm just gonna take away a little bit, and then I'll go back and I'll touch it up. That's it for the cone. So let me show you what we have so far. We have the cube. You can see how much darker this really is compared to the cube. And yours should be darker as well, okay? And now the sphere. So for the sphere, especially like spherical objects, like usually this is sitting on a surface. So you'll have light hit the table and go back into the object. So by the end of this, you're gonna see like there's a light area here. And that's what that is. We call that bounce light. That's like light that hits the table and goes back into the object. You guys suckered me into doing this demo all over again. But let's begin. So for the light, for the sphere, let's imagine that the light is coming from the top right corner. Same thing with the cone. So the light is coming here. So this is called like a highlight. These are your kind of midtones, and this is your shadow. For the cone, the cube, sorry, it's the same because the shadow is being cast this way. So you could assume that the light is coming in from this direction. And this is your highlight though, because technically the lightest area would be that side of the cube we can't see. So your highlight for the cube would be the top, and these are your midtones, and then this is your shadow. So the light is kind of the same for all of these objects. And now let's start with the sphere. Zoom in again so you can see a little bit better. And first, this shadow is going to be very dark, except over here, similar to the cone. Keep your pencil sharp, like we already discussed. I'm gonna apply a lot of pressure to try to achieve my darkness here, just to speed it up a bit. And especially since we're not really measuring our value, I have no sense of how dark it should be. But I do know that I want it very dark. Almost as dark as I did over here with the... I feel like this is too light now, but it's kind of got like a glow going on. But it was alright before, so if you did that before, don't worry. Almost as dark as I did those things, I kind of want the shadow of the sphere to be just as dark as those things. I'm moving my paper around. It just makes it easier for me on the table. When you're working on an easel, which is a tool that we have in class, I don't know if when or if we're going to work on the easel this year because of the circumstances, but an easel just lets you work upright, and you get a lot of exercise on your arm because you don't have the luxury of being able to move the paper so easily. You have to kind of twist your arm and hand a lot. Because I do want to speed this one up a bit more, I think, and then you could also see, I don't know, I think that always using a tissue is not the best thing to do, but it's definitely faster. But I'm just gonna apply this pressure. Apply pressure here to try to go a bit faster, and then I'll try to smooth it out with the tissue. But that's not enough. So a lot of the mistakes that occur when using the tissue is that you stop once you use the tissue. Some students tend to stop. They think they're done, but that's not the case. So you need to go back and rework it with the pencil to make sure that your values are clean and all that. So you see, it's not quite as neat as some of our other values like this. So hopefully this is where the tissue is going to come in handy and kind of even out that value for me. And remember that using a tissue like this lightens the value. It does not make it darker. It is pretty good though, because we do want a soft edge over here on this side, and it lets us do that. You don't want a really sharp line. What do I mean by that? I mean, like, look at all this. This is soft, right? This is sharp. So when it comes to spherical objects casting a shadow, it does tend to be very soft, their shadow. Now, it is not clean though. So I do want to clean this up, but this is pretty easy to do with just an eraser. It cleans up really nicely. And you can see that right there. Now I did just say that this tissue technique, it lightens. So right now it's not really as dark as I want it to be. So this is why you have to come back in and darken it up. And you could see what I mean. Like, it's already darker right there. Should be a very dark value. This value needs to be round as well, like the shadow. You see, like it was too sharp. There was a very sharp turn there, and you want to avoid that. And now I want to make sure that even the differences in my shadows blend, which should be true as well. So you see it's very dark, and then it slightly gets lighter, and it gets much softer up there. And that's more accurate to real life. So now it's time to start the shading in the actual sphere. And a lot of students have a hard time with this, and they kind of make the line very dark here. This is where the blending is super important. So, and also remember that bounce light. So there's going to be a little area of light right around here, or a lighter area, like a very soft highlight that happens right around this area. Then that's compared to the area around it. So like I said before, this area is still going to be very dark, just lighter when compared to the things around it. So let's begin. And I'm going to shade in this whole area, the whole left side, just very lightly at first. And then I'll darken as I see fit. And yeah, so when doing a spherical object, a blending tool is super helpful. It's hard to pull this off without a blending tool. Meaning if you don't have a tissue and you're just shading with your pencil and you're not using your finger or something else to shade, it can be hard to do successfully. So for this one, it's one of those ones where I do recommend you use a shading tool. And remember not to try to hold off of the edge here. You don't want to have that halo effect, which we were kind of getting there. So you can see just by me going right into the darker shadow, that halo effect starts to disappear. So now remember that this area here, we want to keep lighter. So there's going to be a dark shadow all the way around the back. And you can see I'm also not trying to kind of stick to a specific like line that I've created, because it's not really necessary, guys. Like, you create these lines, and at the end of the day, some of you are so, addicted to the line that you think it's necessary, and it's really not. The value is really where the magic comes from, and especially that three-dimensionality. So light areas, dark areas, stuff like that. Now, I'm going to keep shading, but I want to leave a little area there that's going to be darker. And so far I've only been hatching. Now it's time, because I do need some darker areas, now it's time to start cross hatching. But before that, I am going to use my tissue, and the tissue here is definitely going to make the light area here too dark, and that's where you might want to use your eraser. Well, I'm going to use my eraser to come back and just clean that up. But this is definitely going to soften it and make that transition Now again, this on its own is not enough, okay? That on its own is not enough. You need to go back and rework it with the pencil, which we're gonna do now. And then we need to go back and do more with the eraser. So now, like I said, we're gonna start darkening this area here. Again, I'll say it again. Remember that the blending tool, the tissue or tortillon, or even using your finger, spreads the value around, but it doesn't make things darker. Okay? Does not make things darker. And where am I getting these, like how do I know where to put it? You're just gonna copy me, but usually when you just look at it, you can see where the light areas are, where the highlights are, where the shadows are, etc., etc. Yeah, like this all has to get much darker, and we're gonna get there. It's gonna take time. Like I said before, this isn't hard. It's time consuming. It takes time. I do want to start like make a mark. I want to make a mark to show where my value is going to end up, so I do it accurately. So this is kind of, some students might stop here, but this is not the right time to stop. And if you did, you kind of start getting this crescent moon type of thing. But now I'm gonna go ahead and start darkening this a lot. You don't want this to be as dark as your shadow though. And if it is as dark as your shadow, you want to darken the shadow more. I have to roll around in my computer desk because I don't want to turn the paper too much for you guys, so it doesn't look too weird on camera. So you hear me rolling around in my computer desk. So you can see that area that I was talking about. I'm gonna kind of keep that area right there. Make sure it's not standing out too much, and it shouldn't go right up to the edge. I do feel like maybe the value here is matching the shadow too much. So I'm going to darken that shadow. Just applying a lot of pressure here, making sure that there's a clear difference. And hopefully that shows up on the camera. I could certainly see it in front of me that it's darkening. So hopefully you can see it too. But I do want to make sure I blend it so it's not too obvious what I've done there. Okay. So now at this point, I'm gonna darken a little bit more, just that specific area. At this point, some students might stop. This is not the time to stop. So right now you have like a crescent moon situation going on. This value needs to blend. So all of this needs to blend into this. There's a few ways to do that. One way could be using the blending tool, but before I use a blending tool, I want to show you the other way, which is hatching and cross hatching. So this is the very harsh edge that I'm talking about, and we want these values to match. So right along that edge, I'm going to hatch and cross hatch to break it up. And as I start moving further away from it, I'm going to start lightening my hatching and my cross hatching. And the whole purpose of that is to try to kind of remove that crescent moon shape that we got going on and make it look more natural, like a natural blend, as if it were a spherical object. And I think that that's already starting to happen there. My air conditioning just turned off, so you could hear me a little bit more clearly. But you see, it's still not happening here. The other way, which is tricky, you got to be really careful not to overdo it, but the other way would be to use a tissue. Let me try that. But just right along the edge, because we do need the right side of this sphere to be lighter. And even if you use the tissue, you may still have to go back, you see, because right now it's still very obvious between these two values, and just hatch and cross hatch between those two values to dissipate or make that separation less obvious. So I think that the best technique is probably a combination of both. Hatching and cross hatching, and going back and reworking it with your pencil. And with that being said, I think we are almost done. I want to make sure this is not too bright here, this bounce light. You see, we got a nice blend going on there. It looks a little grainy in the video because you can see all the texture. I'm zoomed in so you can see the texture of the paper, but I'm gonna zoom out, give you an idea of what that looks like when it's not so up close. And I think that you'll see that, and maybe you'll agree that it looks like it's blending a little bit better. Last thing I want to do is I want to And the camera here is it's tending to exaggerate a bit the light areas. So on camera, this is much lighter than I see it in person. So you know what? I'm just going to darken it. And I have to look at the camera when I'm darkening it. So, because in person it looks completely different. And this is also much lighter on the camera than it is in person. And it really shouldn't be as light as it looks on camera. So I'm going to darken that too. I think that's much better. And then this is not blended on camera. So I can go back, and it's a good thing I took a quick look and just hatch and cross hatch and make sure that those values blend. These values right here as well. You want to make sure that you lighten up as you get to the lighter areas. These lines are very obvious on camera. So I'm just going to go back and hatch in the opposite direction to dissipate those lines a bit. Darken here. It needs to be darker. But just putting more pressure. So yeah, I don't think that's too bad now. Last thing you want to do is you want to get your eraser and you just kind of want to clean up the edge. And you don't want to rely on line too much, so if you can erase a bit of the line, that'd be fine. And there you have it, done from scratch for you guys, so you have an idea of what to do. I still feel like this is like super bright on camera, and this is too bright also on camera. Even if you could get it and it's like anywhere like this, that'll be great. And I'll gladly accept it. That's it. Sorry for the long video, you guys, but some of them have to be long. So I'll see you in class in just a second. And if you haven't already, do the previous assignments. Hopefully you're following along with me. I'll try to remind you in class. So as I finish, then you could also be finished. See ya.